Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, The Future of Finance with KPMG and Workday. This webinar is part of a series called Looking Forward with Workday. Each webinar is designed to give you insight into how your organization can do more with Workday. A few tips on how to get the most out of the webinar today. On the right of the webinar console, you will find content related to today's webinar, as well as a link to our schedule of upcoming webinars. At the bottom of your screen is a gray bar with multiple application widgets you can use. All of the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. We also have quite a few people in the session, so all attendees are muted. We encourage you to submit questions at any time during the session using the Q&A widget, and we'll do our best to address them as quickly as possible. If we do not get to them, we will follow up with you after the webinar. We're also recording this webinar, and an on-demand version will be available to everyone that registered within a week after the webinar. As well, we are going to be covering some forward-looking statements, so please note that this is under our Safe Harbor Agreement. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. We are pleased to have Joe Mawad with us from KPMG, as well as Rob Zweiback, Vice President of Financial Management at Workday. And with that, I will hand it over to Rob.
Thank you very much. So we have a jam-packed agenda for you today. We're going to start with Joe walking through a little bit of an overview of how we see finance in the future and the CFO agenda for disruption. Then I'll take over a little bit and talk about the future of finance with Workday and some of what we're doing to enable what you just heard from Joe. And then we'll partner to take any questions at the end. So with that, I will hand it over to Joe.
Thank you, Rob. And right off the bat, I'd like to kind of get a pulse of those on the phone and start with a polling question. So if you look on your screen, you'll see a question and 5 options. If you could just click the option that you think is most relevant, that'd be great. So I'll read the question for you guys. Question is, what does finance in the future look like to you? In the future, we'll be able to either have more automation, enabling more time spent on other areas of the business, enable the organization to make more data-driven decisions, apply consumer-grade technology to answer key questions, truly be a strategic partner to the business, or all of the above. So I'll pause here for a few seconds, let you guys think through what your view of the future of finance is, and then we'll look at the polling results in about 10, 15 seconds here. Should be pretty straightforward. We got plenty of answers in. I'm going to go ahead and look at the polling results. I think, as you probably all suspect, we were looking for all of the above, the last answer. Certainly, we are looking at more automation. That's a key thing. That might be a priority for some of you who selected that as kind of the second option. Enabling the organization to make more data decisions, as you'll find out today. Clearly, our point of view around the future of finance is including that aspect, applying consumer-grade technology, and truly being a strategic partner. So all of these are part of what we think is the future of finance, really having an organization that can drive each one of these. So that's why we like the answer, the last answer, which is all of the above. Rob, any perspective from your end?
Yeah, I'll just add that I too am kind of glad, I'm glad to see that that's the most common answer. And, over the next hour, I think you will see some of the kind of key proof points and examples of how we intend to help you get there.
Great. Thanks, Rob. So with that, I want to just provide a bit of a perspective that I see. So as you heard in the introduction, I'm a partner in our financial transformation practice. So we interact with a lot of clients at different parts of their journey. And on an annual basis, we like to get the pulse of the top of the house, the CEO, and certainly what we see from a CEO perspective are kind of 3 of these kind of key stats that you see here on this slide. The first one is that the majority of CEOs see that disruption is a theme that they have to deal with. No longer is it something that they're trying to defer or maybe have the next generation of leaders deal with. They see the evidence out there in the market, and I'm sure you all see it as well, that those that are not embracing technology disruption as an opportunity rather than a threat are not winning. So disruption is definitely a theme that we see out there. And look, disruption and change has always been around. But what we certainly see from our vantage point is that the pace of disruption, the pace of change has accelerated to unprecedented levels. If you think through kind of what just happened over the last few years from a disruption standpoint, the pace and the level of disruption is unprecedented. And what that is meaning for our clients is the difference between the winners, those who embrace technology and disruption and actually use it as an advantage. So those are what we term as the winners, and the losers, those that are deferring some key decisions. That differential is actually increasing dramatically. So we see quite a difference from a performance standpoint between those two groups of categories of companies. And I think another important stat that you see here is that CEOs are actually, for the first time this year, they are looking to actively disrupt their sector. Last year when we looked at that stat, it wasn't at the majority mark, which now it's at the 54% mark. So CEOs not only are embracing technology as a way to have a competitive advantage, but they're also looking to actively disrupt their sector. So they're looking to disrupt their sector, and as we'll see in a minute here, they're looking at finance and the tools that they depend on to be a key catalyst in that disruption. So with that in mind, I'd like to actually move to the next polling question to kind of get a feel for the folks on the call today. Where are you in your finance transformation journey? Obviously, every company is at different places, and we're interested in better understanding from the folks on the call today, kind of where are you now? So the first option is haven't started, and there is actually no clear vision currently. Have a vision, but need more automation to free up time to focus on transformation. Need new technology to help us transform, but must determine where to start. The fourth option there is we have identified target areas to improve, leveraging innovative technology. And the last one is we've transformed processes and are excited to do more. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to think through where you are today in your journey. No right answer here. I'm sure companies are in different places, but we're interested to see where the folks on the phone today are in their process. So moving to the polling results, as expected, we see people in different places, and that's pretty consistent with my experience in dealing with CFOs and finance organizations. We have some folks that really are just looking to jumpstart the process. Folks that maybe have tried a few things, they have a vision, but they're really looking at what they can do from an automation and tool standpoint, all the way to those on the bottom there that have really transformed processes and are looking to get to that next level of performance. So I'm not actually surprised by these answers here. Rob, I don't know if you're surprised at all, what you think.
Yeah, I would say I'm not surprised like you. What I would definitely say to the folks kind of at the top is, there is still time, so don't worry, but at the same time, it's time to start moving, right? So it is time to start kind of thinking about this and start making some plans. I am kind of pleased to see that kind of largest group with the red line where, there is kind of clear target identification, but there's still work to be done, and that's great. And, again, kind of we look forward to partnering with our customers and with lots of organizations to kind of help, move folks essentially down this list.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, I think while there is a burning platform, we definitely see a burning platform, there is time to get started. That's the thing. And now is the time, if you haven't started yet, to really think through finance. And along the theme of disruption, what we've noticed is the bar is actually raised from a finance standpoint, meaning CEOs are looking to use disruption as a means of a competitive advantage, and they're really looking to the CFO and the finance organization to help navigate them through that disruption. And what that means, and what we see, is that finance needs to really disrupt themselves. They need to reinvent themselves. And I'm going to spend a few minutes explaining what that really means from my perspective and what we've seen out there based on research and interactions that we've had with our clients. So if you look at this next slide, if you think through a 10-year time period, that's a long time. If you think back 10 years, Uber was still not really a company. I think they just formed around 10 years ago. Smartphones were relatively new, probably a year or two in. So the world was dramatically different 10 years ago. So now, if we're going to try to predict what finance will look like in 10 years, that becomes a bit difficult. But what we do know with some trends and some research that we have is that finance is going to have to dramatically change. They're going to have to really reinvent themselves to help the business navigate through this disruption and really help take performance to the next level. So what does that mean? We obviously don't know with certainty, but what that means is that they're going to have to really embrace automation to free up capacity. If you look here, one of the stats that usually gets a bit of reaction is we expect, with the activities that are happening today, around 70% of those will be automated, meaning that labor will not be needed for a lot of the traditional and current activities that the finance and accounting organization are engaged with today. So that's obviously a key number, right? Because that gives finance the ability to do different things, right? So what are they going to be doing? They're going to have to think through different ways to be creative and support innovation in the organization. So we're going to really need to see finance as an innovation engine for the organization. We're going to need to see finance as strategists. I always am interested to see how many folks in our client organizations would define all their finance folks as strategists. Certainly some, but we want to see the majority of finance folks being defined as strategists. From an information standpoint, we certainly see that the delivery of information is going to be radically different than it is today. No more reports. We're going to expect information to be delivered on mobile platforms, maybe taking advantage of chatbots or Amazon Alexa type items. Imagine a future where we can ask our Amazon Alexa what the impact would be of a change in a price that we put out there in the marketplace on our gross margin, right? We ask our Alexa to tell us what the weather is and to chart our routes to and from places using different factors and having those in mind. So why can't we do that for finance? So once again, a lot of unknowns, but certainly we know that finance is going to look very different if we fast forward 10 years. So if I move on to the next slide, what that really means from our standpoint is CFOs and leaders in the finance organization, they have to really think through, how am I get to where I am now to where I need to be in the future? I think when we start to share what we expect from finance in the future, we get a lot of clients that feel, frankly, a bit overwhelmed because they know that where they are today is very different from where they need to be. Well, the good point is a lot of clients are in that place, as you saw in the polling question. What we see here on this slide is most of our clients are focusing on kind of 4 pillars there you see in the 4 areas on the slide there. Certainly, they're looking to leverage automation as much as possible so they could free up capacity and help to fund some of the other things they need to do. And some of the other things they need to do is that yellow bar there is really focus on developing skills and capabilities so they can be better in insights and analysis. So they can be that strategic partner and leverage the amount of data that we have prevalent today. So that's kind of the second area. The third area is once they automate, once they focus on insights and analysis, is really starting to look at the organization. So they have a different type of organization now, probably fewer people, probably more senior folks, probably folks that aren't as engaged with transactional work like shared service centers or offshore locations, but folks that are closer to the business. So the organization actually looks very different. And then finally, the skills and talents. So the skills and talents that are relevant today, some of those are not going to be as important in the future. So I just want to spend a few more minutes before I hand it off to Rob, drilling in a couple of these areas that we see a lot of our clients talking about. But if I was to really describe the CFO agenda on a page, this is how it looks like. Investments in these 4 areas with the goal of really helping finance lead strategy and capital allocation, and always maintaining the responsibility from a risk management standpoint. So the first area I'd like to drill down a little deeper in is this idea of automation, right? Automation is, from our client standpoint, is typically where they start. Because once again, budgets aren't getting bigger, so they need to find a way to fund some of the investments they need to make in their people, and also in their insights and analysis capabilities, right? So by far and away, the two or three kind of technologies that we see most of our clients either investing in today or thinking of investing in from a finance standpoint are the cloud technologies, and some of the smart technologies like robotic process automation and machine learning. Really, those first three technologies have been embraced, and most of our clients are either considering or already implementing one of these, or a combination of these three areas. And the nice thing, obviously one of the nice things that we like about Workday is they're actually embedding machine learning within their cloud platform. So that's awesome, and something that we see as a bit of a differentiator, because it actually allows you to embrace some of these technologies in combination with each other. So that's really the first area, is really embracing technologies, and specifically cloud, machine learning, robotic process automation. Those are the three areas that certainly we see the most momentum on over the past 12 to 18 months. Moving on from there, once we get some wins or start the process, we can get some funds to help with our insights and analytics program. So what that really means is helping our clients and CFOs think through how I can get to what I call the 2Ds to the 2Ps. So if you think through finance and accounting's role in the past, or maybe currently, the majority of our clients are focused on describing what happened and adding some commentary around why it did happen. So those are the 2Ds that I'm referring to. So a good FP&A organization, they're focused on budget to actuals, adding some commentary, explaining variances. Those are the capabilities that a lot of our clients are good at, and frankly, some of those things are important. But with technology, those things are going to get easier to do, and to a large extent, a lot of those activities are going to get automated. So what we want to see is investment in predictive capabilities, what will happen, and more importantly, what should we do about it? So this is back to the role of finance as a strategist. What can the finance organization do to help navigate the CEO and the business to think through not only options, but recommendations on how to leverage what's happening in their industry or the disruption that's out there. And then the last thing, of course, is once you spend some time automating, once you start to put together what I call an insights and analytics agenda, is what are we going to do from a people standpoint? Certainly we know the structure of the organization is going to change, but now certainly skills are going to be very different, and you're going to need to really think through, how do I reskill my people so that they can provide the capabilities that we need to reinvent finance. So there's a lot of things we could think about in this space, but we generally see kind of three categories of skills that are a bit of a gap with some of our clients from a people standpoint. The first is comfort with data utilization and technology. We certainly see finance starting to own more of the technology decisions and the technology agenda than in the past. Rather than throwing it over the wall to IT, we see finance really having to embrace a lot of the technology and understand it, rather than really just throw it over the wall, frankly. And cloud technology is a key part of that. Second is the behavioral. We can automate and use robotics and other technologies, but at the end of the day, people are the ones that can develop relationships and connect the dots. And then finally, the finance technical. So being comfortable with some of the data algorithms, some of the analytics behind the data, that's going to be key. So those are kind of three of the areas that we really do see our clients thinking through from a skill standpoint and what we see in kind of top and center in the minds of our CFOs from an agenda standpoint. So I think from there, I've talked quite a bit, but I think from there I'd like to hand it off to Rob to really talk about how Workday can help enable and help you, frankly, fast-track this journey. We certainly see our clients do a lot of amazing things as they go through this journey partnering with Workday. So with that, I'd like to hand it out to Rob to continue the next part of the presentation.
That's great. Thank you very much, Joe. And so as Joe mentioned, I'm now going to kind of take what Joe has just teed up and talk about how it applies within Workday and what we're doing to help enable the disruption, really, that we already kind of have been talking about. Now, disruption is hard, right? It's not easy, and finance departments have lots and lots of pressures on them. They're busy folks. They're not sitting around waiting to be able to just throw themselves at a disruption kind of project, right? They are dealing with all sorts of internal constraints, all sorts of time pressures, and, of course, external pressures coming from the market, coming from regulatory bodies. And so, they're very busy, and it can be very tempting to kind of continue to focus on the current day-to-day priorities and deal with disruption in the future. There's a problem with that. The internal constraints and the external pressures are not going anywhere. If anything, they're going to get worse. And so really the time is now to be looking at this. I don't think I need to convince the folks on the phone, but it's important to state that just to kind of set the stage. Now, as Joe mentioned before, we are seeing, kind of a breakup into winners and losers in some capacity in terms of, organizations and companies that are really kind of embracing these disruptive technologies and those that aren't. And one of the key insights that I really hope to leave you with is that the distance between the winners and the losers is growing. The gap between the winners and losers is getting bigger and bigger. And so as you can see here, in recent years, the distinction between the winners and the losers is not just about, 47% to 3%. It's actually where the kind of lower quartile is losing ground. And so, again, kind of the impetus is to really move faster in this direction, to really take advantage of the kind of possibilities that are offered from these technologies. If you don't, you really will be left behind. Now, some of the information that we're seeing here comes from research from the Hackett Group, and what we see is that the difference between an average finance organization and a world-class finance organization can result in as large a cost savings as 41%. So 41% of the cost of finance is the difference between world-class and average. And in fact, when we look at a digitally enabled world-class, meaning a finance organization that's already embraced a modern cloud solution, that's already embracing some of these emerging technologies that Joe already talked about, the difference goes up to 60%. That's very significant. In the case of an average kind of $1 billion revenue company, a $1 billion revenue company, that can result in $130 million of shareholder value. So this is not just, we're not nickel and diming here. This is significant savings. So one of the, a couple of additional data points that we see when we talk about really kind of the more kind of forward-looking and strategic finance organizations, lower cost of finance, and that's fine, and that's to be expected. But in addition to that, we're seeing these organizations are able to be twice as effective with fewer full-time employees. So they're using fewer resources to be doubly effective. And so again, the difference that we're seeing between those who embrace these technologies and those who don't is growing and growing and getting bigger and bigger. So, how do you move into this area, right? How do you move into disruption? And how do you really kind of become that strategic finance department that Joe talked about before that everybody seems to want to move to? And we're seeing kind of a few key ways that this happens. First, I do want to emphasize this notion of mastery of the traditional and strategic. One of the key things that we see and that research bears out is that the finance departments that become efficient are the ones that then become strategic. Efficiency is kind of a precursor to becoming strategic, and it makes sense. Once you are able to take time out of processes, once you are able to free folks up from, some of the kind of rote day-to-day activities that currently occupy nearly all the time of many finance departments, you free folks up to do the real value-added activities like analysis and really become that strategic partner to the business. And so it's really imperative to embrace, both kind of the traditional efficiency focus and to really master that as a kind of necessary prerequisite to becoming a true strategic partner to the business. In addition, of course, as Joe mentioned, new skills, being able to kind of reskill and upskill and take advantage of kind of emerging skills around data, around some of the things like machine learning that we've already talked about, and of course embracing these technologies. So when we look at most finance departments today, what we see is, again, a focus on kind of transaction processing. These are kind of, day-to-day activities, kind of rote, a lot of data entry, not a lot of value added, but just really kind of keeping the books going, keeping the business going. That tends to occupy much of the time of the finance department. And so as a result of that, what we see is that the focus on just transaction management dominates everything else. It dominates the need to employ effective controls and manage risk, dominates the need to kind of push insights out to the business leaders. Now with Workday, we provide some capabilities that help our finance departments to go beyond this. So rather than a huge focus on kind of just core transaction processing, with Workday, you're really able to take advantage of continuous accounting. We don't have a heavy reliance on batch processes. We don't have a heavy reliance on kind of legacy architectures. And so as a result, much less time is needed to be spent just kind of pushing transactions through the system, and you really can move to continuous accounting. And what this enables is a much more balanced viewpoint of really being able to spread resources across transactions, across controls, and across insights. So being able to push insights out to the users who need them. And that's all built on top of a very kind of rich and common data architecture that pulls together data from across the entire enterprise and surfaces it all in a very consistent way. So, that's already kind of a step forward. But then as we start to look out, 2 to 5 years, we start to move to intelligent automation, as Joe mentioned before, where we are embracing some of these key emerging technologies, and we're in fact embedding machine learning directly into the core finance processes within Workday. And so this will really allow customers not just to automate their processes, but to do intelligent automation, which means that the process itself is intelligent. It's capable of dealing with unforeseen circumstances, it's capable of self-correction, and it's capable of getting better at what it does over time. And in parallel with that, we're then able to push augmented insights out to our users. So not just insights, not just information, but information with underlying causes. So we're not just able to tell you what happened, we're able to tell you why. And we're able to then pull in the planning to become essentially continuous strategy. Rather than planning becoming a very kind of fixed-in-time process with a distinct beginning and end, it becomes a continuous role of essentially having constantly updated, continually updated strategy in line with the business. And so this really kind of provides the key foundation for the future such that insights becomes the dominant factor. And so transactions just become something that happens, it's largely automated, controls and risk mitigation are in place, but really what the system is all about is pushing insights to the business decision makers that need them and helping to ensure better decisions. So what we're going to do now is drill into each of these 3 areas with some examples of what we're working on in Workday to help deliver these capabilities in the next, as we said, 2 to 5 years. So this is all a little bit forward-looking, but only a little. These are all areas that we are actually working on now. So in terms of intelligent automation, what we're really kind of talking about here again is embracing some of these emerging technologies to be able to automate transactions, take time out of the equation, and really kind of focus in on those processes that are the most labor-intensive, but not necessarily value-added, and take that labor out. There's still a human element to it, but that human element becomes much narrower and much more focused and frees people up to spend time doing more value-added activities rather than just doing rote transaction entry. At the same time, we're going to leverage very sophisticated pattern recognition to detect patterns, to identify anomalies as they happen, so that rather than getting to the end of the month or the end of the quarter and having to go fix lots of things that have gone wrong, we're essentially identifying them as they happen. We're surfacing them to the key decision makers as they happen, who can then decide whether something is wrong and needs to be corrected or whether it's okay and it should process through. and the system gets more intelligent from that human feedback loop. And as a result, we're then able to leverage insights to help decision-making during the period, so that rather than needing to react after the fact, once the books are closed, decision-making becomes a much more continuous process, much more real-time, based on up-to-the-minute data that's always available on demand. So let's take a look, for example, at the record-to-report flow that we see today. Now, this is kind of the non-Workday approach, heavy batch processing, a lot of distinct steps. And so, it's very kind of just rote process, boom, 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 lots of steps in the process, lots of points of failure. And that's an important point, because when something goes wrong, the customer needs to understand exactly what happened and why and how to correct it. That puts a big burden on the customer. With Workday, the process is streamlined. As I mentioned before, we don't have a heavy focus on batch processes. We do much more real-time and much more in-memory, so it is a much more continuous process. There are fewer points of failure, and it's much less of a burden on the finance department managing it, because it's much more automated and much more seamless. That's good, but it's not good enough. And what we're working toward over the next couple of years is the ability to have a true continuous close, to essentially always be in the state of having meaningful financial numbers available to the business decision makers. Rather than having to go through a kind of heavy close process, you're essentially always in that state. And so we're working toward enabling a zero-day close. How are we doing that? A couple different ways. So what this is highlighting is what we're calling the controller dashboard, and this is meant to pull together, leveraging intelligent automation, the key insights into what's going on in the system. Workday provides great auditability on everything that happens in the system, and we will continue to do that. This is not a black box. This is not automation that's happening outside of the purview of finance. It's all visible to the finance department exactly what's happening. And so we're able to push out very kind of key, high-level, summarized information so that you can see exactly what's happening in the system. From each of these infolets, you can then drill down to see some of the detail behind it. So, for example, if we go look at the account reconciliation process. So we're going to leverage intelligent automation to make the reconciliation process easier and easier and easier. We're going to automate the transaction matching, and we've already started to deliver some of the kind of initial milestones to enable this. And we're providing the capability to do very sophisticated account reconciliation and sign-off directly within a core financial system. We're working now on an initiative called Journal Insights, which touches on some of the key technologies we've mentioned earlier, including anomaly detection. The idea here is to detect an anomaly as it happens, so that rather than getting to the end of the month and having to get a whole bunch of accountants together in a room to do a very cumbersome reconciliation, downloading lots and lots of data into spreadsheets and playing detective, instead, we're leveraging machine learning to surface anomalies as they happen, to raise them to the view of the knowledgeable user who can make the decision whether it's an anomaly because it's wrong and needs to be fixed, or whether it's just unusual but is still correct. And based on that human feedback loop, the algorithm gets smarter and smarter and smarter. So there is still a human role to play, but that human role is much narrower and much more focused, and really just focused on providing the value that human judgment can do, and letting the machine do all of the kind of rote work that can be audited away from the user. And we are also working on leveraging machine learning around cash applications, so being able to apply customer payments. Customer payments come in, and they sometimes have very detailed remittance instructions, and it's very easy to figure out what the customer's paying. They often don't. Often customer payments are kind of batched up across lots of different transactions, across lots of different companies, and it can be very time-consuming for the finance department to be able to figure out exactly what the customer's paid. It can require a lot of back and forth between different departments. It can require a lot of communication to the customer itself. We are working now to leverage machine learning to automate that process, to figure out, based on past patterns, what customers have been paying what based on what rules, to detect those rules and to be able to apply them automatically, so that we can then make a very kind of specific recommendation to the knowledgeable user about what we think that customer is paying, and it then becomes a very, again, simple and narrow kind of user function to determine, yes, this is correct and I'll accept it, or no, it's not. There's still that human feedback loop built into the process so that it gets smarter and smarter over time. So those are some examples of what we're doing around intelligent automation. I also want to highlight the Accounting Center, which is a new initiative. This will be a new product coming out next year. The Accounting Center is a very exciting initiative which allows our customers to extend the Workday accounting engine to process operational transactions that originate outside Workday. So we see this in many different industries, including banks, including insurance companies, including many others, where there's lots of transaction activity that originates in very kind of industry-specific systems, sometimes very high volume. And so what Accounting Center will allow our customers to do is leverage the exact same rules-based accounting engine that we use in Workday against those operational transactions. And we do that in partnership with Prism so that the ability to load operational transactions in very high volumes into Prism for reporting and analysis, which many of our customers are already taking advantage of, is then extended to be able to then process those same transactions through our accounting engine and posting into the ledger. So there's a single input, a single pipe. You load your transactions once, and the same load that you're doing for analysis and reporting through Prism, you can now also leverage for accounting processing through the core financials. This highlights one of the key kind of use cases of the Accounting Center, whereby bringing in these very kind of high volumes, large volumes of very kind of low-level detailed operational transactions, and having that detailed operational transaction data in the exact same place as your summarized financials, you're able to do very rich analytics, very rich reporting from a very high level directly down to the detail, all using data discovery, the very nice kind of visual drag and drop interface that our Prism customers are already using. So that gives some examples of some of the things that we're doing around intelligent automation, and I'll now pivot to talk about augmented insights, and so some of the capabilities that we are leveraging and building towards to be able to push augmented insights out to users. And so again, the key point here is not just to be able to provide numbers, not just to be able to provide summary results, but to get to the why, to understand what's driving these changes and why. What's really happened? What do I need to understand about what are the key drivers behind my changes? And this, again, is continuous. This is not, something that only happens at the end of the month. This is continuous. It's all based on the Workday security model. And so the goal here is to be able to push these insights directly out to the information consumer, to not have to require the middleman of an IT department, but to be able to really put the different information consumer roles in the driver's seat. And so whether we're talking about the controller, whether we're talking about FP&A, whether we're talking about a line of business manager who's really not a finance specialist, or whether we're talking about an executive audience, the key point is to provide the tools and the insights that these folks need directly to them in a way that they can consume directly, again, without needing to go through intermediaries. This highlights the notion of augmented insights. And so the key point here, again, is that we are leveraging machine learning to drill deep into the data and surface not just the high-level indicators, not just the KPIs, but the detail behind that. So revenue growth is X%. Well, why is it X%? And so leveraging machine learning to drill into the data, detect the patterns, and identify the key drivers that led to revenue growth or that led to, the reason for a budget overrun. And so rather than forcing users to be downloading huge volumes of data into spreadsheets and doing all sorts of pivot tables and slicing and dicing, we're leveraging machine learning to do that pattern detection, to surface those insights directly to the users, and again, to take time out of the equation. So that should give a little bit of an idea about what we're doing to deliver augmented insights to our users. And now we'll talk a little bit about how we see continuous strategy playing a role. And so the key point here, of course, is that, we've done a lot of talking about disruption. Customers need to be prepared for disruption. They need to be able to disrupt themselves, and they need to be able to react and anticipate and get out in front of disruption before it happens. And so, how do we do this? Well, by essentially employing continuous strategy, by making planning a continuous part of the finance process, not a separated, thing that happens at fixed points in time, We see the ability to protect your business by seizing opportunities to invest, by being able to do very kind of quick course correction, and by being able to really kind of take advantage of opportunities as they happen and drive revenue growth faster than you otherwise would be able to. We are right now working on leveraging machine learning across our different planning functions. There's tremendous benefit that we see to being able to leverage machine learning to detect odd cases, to do predictive planning, and to really kind of drive planning across the entire organization so that it becomes a very kind of cohesive process, touching on not just finance, but on operations, on sales, on workforce, and really being able to do much more of a kind of predictive planning, get out in front of these changes before they happen, rather than it being just a reactive process by looking at last year's results and extrapolating from there. And so this is an example of revenue planning. And so by kind of bringing together the very rich, detailed, actual data that we have in Workday and having that very tightly coupled with our planning capabilities, and again, leveraging that sophisticated machine learning to detect patterns in the underlying data, we're able to surface what our revenue is, what our revenue growth is going to look like, what's driven it so far, and therefore what we can do to drive greater revenue growth in the future. And so what we really see happening is planning and core finance and actuals and analytics becoming a very kind of continuous cycle where each plays off the other rather than these being kind of separated pillars. So what does this mean for you? So the key point that we want to leave you with is that by embracing these emerging technologies, I've kind of focused mostly on machine learning as one example, but of course we've also talked about robotic process automation, we've talked about others. By embracing these key technologies, you're able to transform your operations and empower the business. You're able to put insights directly into the hands of the decision makers who need them. You're ultimately able to make better decisions. And that's key. So, we started off by talking about efficiency. We started off by talking about how, taking costs out, taking time out is a key enabler of efficiency, which is a key precursor to really becoming a much more strategic partner to the business. And so the key point that I want to emphasize here is to just kind of return to that point and emphasize that by driving efficiency and by becoming a strategic partner to the business, you're able to really provide value in both ways, and leveraging these key technologies is the key to enabling both. So why Workday? Well, Workday prides ourselves on our customer satisfaction. We have a goal every year of achieving at least 95% customer satisfaction, and we have done better than that for the last several years, reaching 98% for the last 2 years in a row. We are number one in the Future 50, and we do not sell shelfware. So our financials is growing rapidly, and it's growing by customers implementing it and going live. And we've been able to maintain a roughly 70% ratio of live customers out of the total since for several years now, really since we introduced Workday Financials. We have nearly 100% availability, obviously. We alone in the industry have an SLA around performance, and we have a path to zero downtime. And, hopefully as you kind of are walking away with this, we have a very clear roadmap and clear work that's happening now to deliver on continuous strategy, on augmented insight and intelligent automation, and really to kind of deliver those key emerging technologies that Joe talked about at the beginning directly in a core financial solution. And we think that we're unique in the industry in that regard. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to Sam.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Rob. We're going to cover Q&A in just a second. Also, I want to say that we will be sending out a replay of the webinar in the next week or so stay tuned for that. But before we get to Q&A, 3 upcoming webinars to make you aware of as part of this series. Starting in June, will be a Prism Analytics Spotlight with our customer Oriental Bank. Rob talked about an augmented insights, part of which is inclusive of Prism, so that will be an exciting webinar to participate in. We have an upcoming webinar later in June with Bucknell University, where they'll be highlighting how they're leveraging adaptive Insights Business Planning Cloud. And then also in June, on the 18th, we'll have a customer webinar with Pivotal Software, where they'll highlight some of the record-to-report capabilities that Rob mentioned earlier. So lots of exciting webinars coming up. And with that, I'd like to go to the Q&A portion with Rob and Joe. We had a few Q&A questions come through. The first is for Joe, and the question came through, which is around how cloud ERP like Workday is really different than some of the traditional ERP systems out there today. Joe, could you give us some insight there on how you'd answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That's a great question. We hear that quite a bit from our clients. Most of our clients haven't gone through a cloud project yet. And, like I mentioned earlier, that this is the wave of the future, so they know that they are going to go through the process. And one of the things that we love to share with them, and these are our actual client stories that we have evidence on, is when they implement a cloud solution like a Workday solution, they're actually implementing a standard leading practice process. So it comes less around, what should we do, more around you're getting a leading practice process with this cloud implementation. And our clients love that. The days of, whiteboarding and brainstorming requirements, those days are kind of over. They expect a leading practice, standard process, and that's what we see our clients getting from cloud packages like Workday. So that's something that we see pretty prevalent out there, and we see people excited about cloud because they like this new way of working and this new way of implementing a tool.
Got it. Thank you so much, Joe. Rob, a question for you that's come in is, as finance does look to drive incremental change, how do you get them and the rest of the finance team to embrace innovation, to embrace, more, different ways of working? What would your advice be for those teams out there trying to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, one of the challenges that I think we see regarding that is that the finance department and the accounting department, they tend to be conservative, and for good reason, right? I mean, these are mission-critical applications, and, the numbers have to be right, and they have to be on time, and you can't mess around with that, and that's critical. So I think the key point with embracing innovation is that we're not just talking about doing some cool technology for the sake of doing some cool technology. These are real, enterprise strength capabilities that deliver significant business benefits. And so the emphasis always needs to be on, what are you getting for it, right? What you're innovating, well, fine. What are you going to get out of that? And the key point that, I feel like I'm starting to become a broken record, but I'll emphasize it once again. The key point is that by embracing some of these technologies and by taking advantage of the capabilities for innovation that they provide, you are able to drive efficiency into your processes, which will save cost and will save time, but more importantly, will enable you to become that strategic partner to the business that you want to and enable you to make better decisions. And that's ultimately what it's got to be all about.
Fabulous. Okay, third question. Joe, we'll look to you for this one, which is you mentioned the focus on talent. How, from your point of view and experience in talking to people in the market, how are finance teams already in the process of reskilling their individuals, given the focus on analytics? What are they doing? Any insights you can share there?
Yeah, no, thanks. I love people questions because even though we keep talking about automation and robotics, we have to remember that people are the future, right? So we really need to invest in our people and help them think through what are the capabilities and skills that are going to be that they're going to need to be successful in the future. So while a lot of the work is going away and the nature of the work is going away, we still are going to rely on smart finance and accounting professionals, but perhaps in different ways. So we see different skills and different roles emerging. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the skills that are really important is, the ability to embrace technology, the ability to be strategic and leverage your relationships, the ability to be good with what we call finance technical skills. So the way we see clients kind of thinking through how am I going to transform my people agenda is they have to first just really take a pragmatic and hard look at where they are today. So looking at where their folks are today, doing some assessments on their organization, and then building a competency model to say what are the skills that our organization needs to be successful in the future once we have the right technology and the right tools to automate a lot of the things that our folks need to do. So it's not an easy process because you do have to take a hard look at your folks, and you have to really think through the folks that frankly are embracing change, embracing the new ways of working, and some folks that may be a little more resistant to it. I guess I see typically three challenges. First, a commitment challenge. In other words, our team's convinced that their leaders will back them if they work differently. Of course, capacity, kind of having the bandwidth, and then finally, capabilities. So how am I going to train and retrain people to have the capabilities of the future? So it's a journey. It does take time, but it is a process that I love to hear that clients are thinking about because people really are the future. Of course, enabled by technology so they can do the things that are more valuable.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. We've had a couple of other questions come into the Q&A chat box that I'll ask Rob to answer. One is the controller dashboard currently available in Workday?
So there is a controller dashboard available in Workday, but it's a little bit narrower in scope than what I showed. What I showed was more of a forward look of something that we're working on now. So that'll be kind of an evolution of the controller dashboard.
Perfect. The second question that's come in is, when will Adaptive Insights Planning Cloud Solution be available in the Workday environment?
So we are working now on kind of bringing Adaptive together with the power of one across Workday Financials and Analytics. We're working on it very rapidly. We've delivered some of the initial capabilities already. So single sign-on across Adaptive and Workday is already available to our customers. And over the next roughly 12 months, we're going to continue to build that out in terms of bringing Adaptive into the common security model, surfacing adaptive data to the same reporting tools without any need to have data movement. So you're going to be seeing kind of incremental steps over roughly the next 12 months to get there.
Wonderful. I think that's it in terms of the questions. So I would like to thank everyone so much for joining our webinar today. We also have, for those of you that are looking to get more hands-on access to Workday, meet with some of our folks in person, we have an event series that's coming to a city near you in 22 cities across the U.S. and Canada called the Workday Discover Program. So take a look at that. Again, there's also access and links to additional information, additional webinars in the console of the webinar application today. So we encourage you to explore more. We hope you found this webinar valuable, and thank you again so much for joining us. And thank you to Joe and the KPMG team for participating in this with us.